On the screen we can see the software called Photoshop. This is where I did the bulk of my editing for my photos to enhance them and make them look the best they can be. As we can see, the layout is very simple, and this means that as a new beginner to Photoshop, it made it a lot easier for me to understand how to use it, how to create the best effect with it. On the right hand side of the screen we can see the area which is used for layers. Layers are used because it means that we can develop our image without losing the best bits if we make a mistake. It makes it easier to duplicate layer and work on one singular aspect such as exposure and adjust this to what we want, and we can do mask layers to remove from the image what we don't want. The use of layers within my images was very useful due to being able to add certain lights to certain areas of the photos, and for example where I had my red lipstick, having the levels made sure I brought forward just the red lipstick and nothing else. So this was very good for my project. Another aspect I used within Photoshop is this tool over here, which you can get lasso tool, polygon tool or magnetic tool. All these tools just basically can cut out and take out places of your image, so you can extract the background or extract certain parts. As well, I use them for selecting certain areas such as the top or the lips or the skin, and making these enhanced more by changing the levels or contrast of the image. Having these tools really helped with my work because it meant I could adapt and change it to make it more unique and suit the purpose of my genre. Through time of using it, I learned that the best way to do it is to take time and carefully do it so you have the best outcome. Going on screen now is some of the tools I found most useful for my work. Due to my images having quite bright light and not a lot of colour difference, I needed to use the dodge tool, which makes things lighter to emphasise these parts and highlight them on the cheekbones or the collarbones or areas like the fingertips, which are normally more highlighted. The dodge tool, however, makes things slightly darker. This tool I didn't use as much, and I used it with a very low exposure so that it wouldn't ruin my image. Where I used this tool on my work would have been in the collarbones, around the sides of them to emphasise them and slightly contour them, and as well I would have done it below the neck to make sure it's defined and looked smooth and professional. Furthermore, still looking at the tools on the left hand side of Photoshop, the blur and sharpen tool were the ones I used the most. The blur tool I used in my own work, and due to this software it definitely enhanced my work because it made sure I could blur the skin and make it look flawless, which we see a lot in across media with Photoshop. With sharpen, I use this a lot across my project, and it was good that Photoshop's software was so good for this because it meant that I could sharpen the hoops of the jewellery and the ears, the rings and the necklace, and then sometimes I sharpened the eyebrows to give them definition. This is something I had to adapt to due to sometimes if it was done too strongly, the sharpness on the certain feature will look overly done and overly photoshopped. So over time I learnt to lower the exposure and make sure it really blended in well with the image and made the best image it could. On screen now shows the menu of the adjustments we can make to the image. By using the tool like the lasso tool or magnetic tool, you can select certain areas of the image and then click onto the menu image and go to adjustments. Here you can see a list of things which you can modify to your image, such as brightness, levels, and then you can create effects like a blur or a surface blur, which is what I used on the skin. With the exposure is something which you play with around with as well. Brightness and contrast is something I probably use the most to create the most dramatic image. On screen now is a different software called Final Cut Pro. This is where I edited my music video and put together all my different cuts. As we can see, the layout is slightly confusing, but it works well for this software as it is as simplistic as it could be. Everything is laid out in areas which is labelled and menued, so it made it easier for me to adapt to this. Clicking File and then Import is where you can import your clips you have taken, and where I would have imported my music video clips. This is very simple because it's just uploaded from any media file on your computer and it uploaded straight away, and it was easy to access the clips when you wanted to find them. Also, the place where they were, the menu is very easy to find and select which parts you needed. Clicking on this magic sparkly brush at the bottom, it opens up this area where you can adjust the shadows, midtones, highlights, exposure of the video that you have in front of you. I used it a lot in my video because it made sure that I had all my shots equally contrasted and all the lightness levels were similar, so there wasn't any jumping between lighting. This was helpful because as well it was very easy to use with just dragging things up and down. However, because of this being so simplistic, you had to be careful not to go overboard with it. Also on the left hand side you can gain this menu as well. The aspects I used on this menu were the offset and the border side under the effects. The effect I used was letterbox, and this is what I did to gain the panels at the bottom and top of my video. This effect meant that my framing was adjusted and looked better than it did without the effect of letterbox. As well, it gave the opportunity to use keyframes. Keyframes I used to do the black in and outs and the white in and outs within my video. Some of these keyframes I used are playing above now. The keyframe is where you put to a second when it's going to go white or black, meaning on the beat it will hit that colour you want. As well, on the right hand side as well, there's an area where you could adjust the hue or colour of the video. Playing right now is some aspects at the end of my video where I have changed the colour to create this coding convention of more of a purple neutral tone throughout contemporary R&B. It was useful to have this because it meant I could adjust my clips to make sure the skin wasn't too pale or too blue, and as well it gave a better overall effect of being professional due to being able to level out the colours within the shots. The last big software I used was InDesign. InDesign is where I just constructed my digipack and my advert. InDesign was helpful and helped my work be enhanced due to it having many different effects and techniques which will add and develop my piece well. It was easy to import my images and make them the right size due to being able to create columns and lines which will help me align all my images, words, text, etc. This was helpful due to the software, and after getting my head around it, it was really effective and made my work better. It was clever because of the rulers going up the side and down by the image. You could measure out and make sure each image was correct. Left hand column, there's such things as layers, strokes and gradient. These things out the menu are the things I use the most. I use layers to make sure that I could layer my images and make sure things were in front of things where they needed to be, such as my picture in the background was layered to the back to make sure that no text was left behind it. Stroke I used on my lettering, mainly across Ellie Smith for the black stroke, and as well around the quotes of the critic quotes to make sure they stand out from the background. As well, I used gradients because this had opacity on, so it meant in certain aspects of my image where I needed to, where they needed to be lower opacity, this was achieved due to being able to lower the opacity of certain things and heighten those of others. Across the top is where you can adjust your fonts and the word spacing. It was helpful to be able to move individual letters apart from words and heighten them and slim them, and due to it making a more professional effect and making the lining of words easier. Down the right hand side is a toolbar which has many different tools you can use. The ones I used the most was the text and the rectangle. The rectangle I used as creating just tiny slim rectangles for my lines under my important words such as Ellie Smith. The tools were very helpful and I did have to learn over time what each one meant, especially on creating the text around my CD. As you can see on the screen now, the text around my CD is curved, and this is something I didn't know before, but due to this software I was easy to learn and make this effect quite easily.